Life Audio.
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. So this week's episode is an interview with a guy named Brenton Sconce, and I am so glad that this interview is coming early in the life of this podcast because I think it really sums up what I want this to be about, right? And so, this podcast, I kind of say it's like 50% interviews with people just like you and me, and 50% interviews with clinicians and faith leaders who can give us, kind of solid help on what to do once we realize that maybe we have a problem. And Brenton is a perfect example of the Christian alcoholic, right? The person who on the outside seemingly has everything figured out, everything that they want. And yet, because of some root issues that haven't been rooted out, alcohol becomes an easy fix, an easy escape when the storms and the winds of the world get to be too much. So Brenton was a pastor of a church in the state of Washington, and you would think, hey, he's a pastor, right? Everything's great. He's got everything together. And then when things kind of went sideways, then he turned to alcohol, and he turned to alcohol in a big way. So Brenton's going to tell his story. But Brenton also in his life now, he's a funny guy, although he comes across as kind of serious. So it's interesting that he runs an Instagram account called Office Recovery. And what that is it's all about memes from the office, and he takes them and he relates them to being in addiction recovery. And they are so fun and they are so funny. So go ahead and give that Instagram account a follow. And so we'll start the interview by talking a little bit about Office Recovery and what led there. And then we will jump into the deep end, and this interview gets emotional, and I think hopefully you will be able to see yourself in parts of Brenton's story. So let's go. Brenton, thank you so much for joining Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. This is a real treat to have you, especially because it's just cool to see how God orchestrates things. And this was, I had when I started out on the journey of the book and putting the podcast together, I had a list of people that I was going to interview. And I mean, some of them sure are psychologists or counselors, and some of them are just regular Joes. You were not on my list because you weren't in my ecosystem at that time. Right. Until I started posting about my sobriety journey, started posting about just what I had been going through and what I had been learning. And this random account started following me and sending me really encouraging messages. And it was your account because you are the Office Recovery guy. So before we get into your stories, tell us a little bit about this IG account that you created and what it's all about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's an honor to be on here, and just really cool to actually get to talk to you face to face too, because yeah, there's, that connection over sober Instagram was, I felt instant connection when I saw the Packers memorabilia on, and was like, yep, there we go. Because I live out in Washington State, but there's a decent Packers fandom out here, but I'm one of very few that rock the green and gold, so that connected us right away. But yeah, the Office recovery, man, it came about. I've always been an Office fan, like a lot of people. I grew up watching it when it was actually airing on TV, and then got really into it when it started streaming and was able to just kind of binge watch it. And so I've always been a fan of it. And really, the idea came from when I was in rehab in the treatment center that I went to. Um, just seeing this surprising amount of joy among all of these addicts, right, that are in recovery, that are going through the process of trying to heal. And it just kind of struck me as super interesting that in what you would kind of assume might be a pretty glum and like dark space, and there certainly were times of that, but like in all of that, there was like a lot of laughing and a lot of joy and a lot of even, jokes and things like that were going around. And they would always watch on movie nights. They would pick like comedies, and I think there's an element of like striving for happiness, right? That they're kind of getting from all that. But it struck me that there's something healing about laughter. There's something healing about joy that all throughout Scripture Scripture is replete with commands to be joyful and to think on positive things. And I mean, we know those scriptures, and so when I got out of the treatment center, I was like, I was never a social media guy ever at all, and I just was like, you know what? If there's any way that I can kind of share my recovery journey and combine it with my deep love of The Office in a way that hopefully like brings people joy and puts a smile on people's faces, because walking through the process, over the last 2.5 years now, uh, there's dark days, there's tough moments, like there's hard times. And my whole thing was just, man, if I could put a smile on somebody's face through just a ridiculous meme, using The Office content, then I feel like I've kind of done my part. And so that's kind of where it came about. And it's a lot of fun because now I get to watch The Office not just for fun, but I can pretend like it's work or something.
You
Like
can
I have
you
to
can
watch
like
this year.
comp. Yeah, you can like
Right.
write off your Peacock subscription at the end of
Yeah,
the
I'm gonna write
year.
off the exactly. Yep. Yep. Right off my YouTube Premium subscription, all of that stuff. Um, no, but just yeah, that's really where I kind of sparked the idea kind of came from. And um yeah, and it kind of, I mean, it hasn't like blown up or anything, but it's been really really cool to see the folks that I have been able to connect with, like you, and like with Brad over at Sober Motivation, and just some of these other guys that I've been able to connect with through that venue. And so it's been really a really awesome way for me to not only have my own kind of accountability form, but also be able to connect with people and
Yeah.
be able to walk life, share life with people. So that's kind of where that came from.
This is interesting. I love what you said there. You said something I think is going to be a good segue. You said, in a sense, have accountability with. And I think one of the things that I've been surprised just in my own journey is, I get some people like, why are you so open about this? Well, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons, right? But one of them is like, the more that I talk about it and the more people I talk about it with is like, there's this like built-in accountability, right? And we can talk about all the reasons and motivations for why you get sober and are in recovery, but one of them, I think is like, yeah, the more people I tell about it, the more people I'm like, you know what? If I do relapse, like there's a lot of people that I gotta tell, right? There's a lot of people,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's like that's sometimes what can keep you sober. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's just, I think for me, it's really a way to constantly be in that sober space mentally. Like it's, 2 years removed now. I think it's easy for me to get just busy with work and life and family and all that stuff. And while it's great that, I'm not like dwelling on on my past by any means, but to be constantly being in that sober space. And this is one way to do that is, I'm constantly thinking of material and different content. So it provides a level of accountability where, you know, there's some folks that are going to be watching, and then also provides me the opportunity to be in that mental space of
Yeah.
constantly thinking about my recovery.
Yeah, I wrote back last year that like one of the reasons that I write as much as I do is like like the dirty little secret is that it's really for me, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just happens to be a benefit that other people get something from it because it's my therapy. It's me working out my salvation and sobriety and fear and trembling on
Right.
my Substack, and the most, it's for me because I need that, right? It
Yep.
keeps me in the headspace. It keeps me thinking about those things. It keeps me wrestling, right, in a good way and not getting complacent.
Yeah.
And it's just an added benefit, right? So for you, it's like I think that's what you're saying, right? Like it
Yep.
keeps you in the headspace. It keeps you thinking about those things. It keeps you wrestling with it, and then we get the benefit of laughing along with it. So, man, thank you. The handle is office recovery, right?
Yep. At Office Recovery. Yeah.
Yeah, so on Instagram. So go check them out. And so now, Brenton, I want to get into your story because I think you are a perfect example of why I wrote Confessions. It is a story that I think is really important, and it embodies a lot of when I say there's a lot of people out there like us, and that they look, all walks of life. Your story is a perfect example of that. You're the pastor. You're the guy that is supposed to, quote unquote, I put that in air quotes, like not struggle with this, and yet you did and do in a way, right? And so
Right.
I would love for you to, as much as you feel like you can share and be open. I know you know the sober motivation people, and it's like I think there's so much health. Like for me, it was so freeing when I started hearing stories, and then I'm like, there's two ways you can take it. You can play the comparison game, and I did that for a while, and that kept me, drinking. But then there was also like when I finally that switch flipped in my brain, it was like, oh, I'm not using this compare, but man, I'm not too far gone, or there's other people like me. I'm not alone. And so I
Yeah.
think your story
Yeah.
is a great one. So why don't you just kind of take us back to the beginning of your struggle with alcohol and how it manifested, and who you are, and what that led to.
No, absolutely. And I think just kind of to your point before I launch in, the ability to connect with people on a way where you recognize that you're not alone is absolutely massive. Just for life in general, for sanctification purposes, we're called to be with one another and to bear each other's burdens, and you don't know, you can't carry burdens you don't know about. And so being able to do this does exactly that. And I think within Christendom, within the church, whatever you want to call it, there's untold amounts of folks that it might not be alcohol, but it's something else. And any opportunity to be able to share these kinds of things and let people know, hey, we struggle. Like the sanctification, like you said, is messy, but God's grace is big and God's grace is good. And so, yeah, my story. I grew up as a PK, pastor's kid. I grew up as an MK, a missionary kid. Great family, loving family. And went through college and all of that. I started drinking probably a little bit later in life than a lot of alcoholics that you might talk to. I didn't start drinking until I was 19. Is when I think I had my first sip ever. And for a lot of years following college, I was very much just a social drinker, very much, having a drink with dinner. And that was about it, nothing out of control at that point. And a couple years out of college, I ended up getting married and having a baby. That marriage did not last after about a year and a half. And that was incredibly impactful, way more than I ever thought it would be until now. I'm kind of realizing the impact that had. And that's kind of I think the tipping point where when I look back, I start to see my drinking begin to have a purpose outside of just something in my glass with dinner. Um, and I wouldn't say that I was going crazy, but there was definitely a shift, something within me that um, started seeing alcohol as healing in some way, shape, or form. And um, and so following her leaving, I started drinking a little bit more. And probably, I mean, time goes on. It's, now probably, so 7 years later, I'm still very much, socially drinking, but now there's alcohol in the home, and it's starting to be at nighttime, with dinner and that kind of thing. Um, and uh, I met a gal. We ended up getting married. And um, early on in our marriage, she was like, "Hey, why don't you, go back to school?" I was starting to feel a pull towards ministry. I don't know if that's my upbringing. I didn't know where that was exactly coming from, but started feeling a pull towards ministry. I mean, outside of maybe a couple of years following my divorce, I've always been very active in the church, always attended a church, those kinds of things. And um, when I first got remarried, there was a church that was planting a satellite campus in our town, and it's a big church. And I had been a part of that church, a decade earlier, and when I lived close by to the kind of their main hub. And so when I heard that they were planting in my town, I contacted the campus pastor and started chatting with him. And we got along really well and said, "Hey, I want to be a part of this plant." And so we did that. My wife and I joined that plant, and I was able to serve as a community group director for the church. And so I kind of oversaw the small group, community group ministry stuff. And while that was going on, my wife was like, "Hey, you should, go back to school and get a degree in ministry. It seems to be the direction you want to go." And so I went back and got my bachelor's in ministry leadership, and um, yeah, and just continued to serve the church there. Continued to just kind of still, I would say, a social drinker at that point. Um, and in 2018, I got a call to candidate as a lead pastor for a church north of Seattle. And so we went out and candidated, and it was very much a revitalization project. It was an older church. It was a church that was on its last legs, and they wanted to bring some youth in and bring, hopefully kind of spark some life back into it. And my wife and I spent a good amount of time, almost a year, praying about it, and felt like that's where we should go. So I went over in 2018 to pastor that.
And what was your drinking like during this phase?
Yeah, during this phase, it still was. I mean, it was alcohol in the house, drinking at nights, maybe a little bit, in the afternoons on the weekends, like a beer here or there. I would go out with, other guys and go to, whiskey bars and those speakeasies and those kinds of things just for nightcaps and things like that. But it wasn't, at that point, there wasn't any intentionality behind the drinking to the level that I became.
Yeah.
It certainly had increased since the divorce, but it still wasn't quite to that intentionality, I would say.
And what about getting drunk? Was that on the table, or how was, like, would it happen a little bit? Like, what did that look like?
Pretty rarely. I would say very rarely was I drunk. I was always in social situations where I knew what I was doing and how much I was consuming, and there wasn't, at that time, I didn't feel this uncontrollable urge to just drink and drink and drink. And so it was very much, and in my kind of theological tribe, if you will, or strain. There was very much uh, this flavor of like the men in leadership go out and smoke cigars and have a glass of bourbon or scotch or whiskey, and at the end of the night, and we're around a bonfire, and uh, that kind of vibe was what I was in, and yeah, so it uh, while I drank, it wasn't every day. It was definitely every week. But yeah, there's the best way I can describe it is there wasn't any kind of intentionality outside of just the kind of the social aspect with it, or on the weekends with my wife or something to just unwind kind of thing. Um, and so we get into the church setting north of Seattle, and man, I poured everything I had, like blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. It was what I thought was a dream come true, to be able to finally do what I felt like I was called to do. And it was a small church, which means I did everything as the lead pastor, including teach the Sunday school class, do everything. Well, we get over there, and within like 6 months, the honeymoon stage starts to wind down, and we realize cost of living is sky high. And there's a whole bunch of details about the church that I don't need to get into, but long story short, there's two years go by, and probably the last year that I'm there, maybe the last 16 months that I'm there, it's just an absolute grind. There is, I was brought in to quote unquote revitalize, and I was supposed to be the guy with the ideas, and I was supposed to be the guy with the momentum, right, that kind of kept this church going. And when I first showed up that first year, we really walked through a lot of just, let's make sure we're healthy, care for the body that's in front of you. And I really took that seriously, and I wanted to say, okay, let's make sure that we are a healthy church before we really start, reaching out and doing all these kind of outreach, type things. So I spent about, the first year or so doing that, and got to a point where like, okay, let's see little bits here and there where we can reach out and be plugged in and get involved in the life of the community around us, and hopefully see some folks start to attend, and hopefully see, lives start to get, saved, and people to walking and flourishing really. Well, as that started happening, I just started hitting wall after wall with the other leadership in the church. And I spent about 16 months bringing up idea after idea after idea of how to be involved in the community, how to love our neighbor, how we can reach out. And it very quickly became this thing of, we want a pastor that preaches on Sunday and then leaves us alone. And kind of, I think you've got a little too much excitement going right now, kind of thing, for which I was very surprised by and thought, well, I thought that's what you brought me in for. So 16 months go by, and it's just, I'm preaching multiple sermons a Sunday, 2 different sermons a Sunday. And my wife's working full time to make ends meet because the cost of living is through the roof. The church is paying me essentially part-time salary, maybe even less than that. So I end up having to find a job. And at one point I think I had 3 jobs. But was, putting 30, 40 hours into the church on top of everything else. And so after about 16 months of hitting wall after wall with no momentum in the church, we got to a point where my wife and I were just thinking, we're like, this is not sustainable for us. It's not healthy for our marriage. It's not healthy for our kids. We had a little boy at the time. And so I stepped down, and
that was in what year?
That was in the fall of 2020. So, so I walked this church through the initial stages of COVID and all of that. And gathering, not gathering, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
I got to kind of help lead through that. And um, so I stepped down, and we moved back to the town that we had come from in Eastern Washington. And I find a job in outside of ministry. And so I'm working that job, to make ends meet. And that's where the drinking skyrocketed. Um, it almost instantly, as soon as we got back to our hometown, I found myself drinking more and more every night. And then I found myself starting to, try to find something in the morning, trying to find something in the afternoon. And then started becoming kind of this all day search for a drink. And I was cognizant enough to know that I was doing it for the purpose of just pure escapism and not wanting to deal with all of a sudden all these things that were starting to come across my soul.
We'll be right back after this. And when you say all these things coming to, like, what is that? Is it
yeah. Man. So feelings, emotions. I mean, at the end of the day, what I understand it to be now is this overwhelming sense of failure, this overwhelming sense of not living up, to expectations, whether my own expectations or the expectations of other people, that I kind of put on them that I thought they expected of me. Feeling like a failure at the church, that I wasn't able to stick it out, despite it just being an absolute grind and incredibly difficult and would have continued to be damaging for the family. Like, there was this weird feeling of, even though I made the decision for the health of the family to step away, and I wholeheartedly think that was the right decision, there was still a feeling of failure. And that's, I think, really at the root of it, that's where that kind of started coming from. And obviously we can go into a ministry idolatry and all of those kinds of things that played into it, because I think that's all very, very much in there. But yeah, so I started drinking heavier and heavier, and it got to a point where I knew I was drinking beyond what would be socially acceptable. I was drinking beyond what, my family would, they would question, and they'd be like, what are you doing?
How would they bring it up to you?
I think it started out with, like, we would go out, say we'd go out to a friend's house and they would have drinks, and I would pretty much be pounding them, trying to be discreet, but just be drinking them. And my wife would, come up to me and be like, hey, you need to slow down. I'm going to drive home, those kinds of things. But that was pretty much it. I mean, once it got to a point where I recognized, okay, socially, this isn't going to look good. It's not acceptable to drink this much this quickly. I started isolating and started just doing it all on my own. Right. Yep. And then that's when you start hiding and you start lying. Yep. And so I started just drinking, and it got to the point where there was, that was about a 2-year window from 2020 to 2022 where, the drinking just rapidly increased. And I got to the point where medically, I was going to the ER.
Just from you would drink so much in a sitting, or what?
No. So, there would be, I felt like I was having heart attacks, right? So I think in my bigger, understanding of things now, I think there was definitely panic and anxiety attacks happening. I think that, we can go that whole route too. I think there's something highly spiritual in all of that, that God
Amen.
was doing for me specifically, in those things. But that's what it was. It was these crazy panic, heart attack type symptoms where I was dropping to my knees, felt like my chest was crushing in, and couldn't breathe and all those things. So I'm getting rushed to the ER. They're running EKGs and all these tests and coming back saying everything's normal. And in the back of my head, that whole time, I'm thinking, if I stop drinking, like, I don't know if this is associated with my drinking, but it certainly can't be helping. But it wasn't enough to scare me to stop. Because by that point, I felt like I needed a drink to just show up and be confident. I felt like I needed a drink to be able to relax. I felt like I needed a drink to be able to do my job. I felt like I needed a drink, just to be me, is what I thought.
Which, by the way, I think you said something there, and I think the only thing I want to interject in this is because I think it's so accurate. And I think this is what you're getting at. If not, you can correct me. But I think sometimes we, there's many different sides to God's grace, and you and I know God's grace in loving us and welcoming us back, like the prodigal son. But there's also a side of God's grace where he gives us over to what we're doing in order so that we feel and see the consequences, right? So it's like when you're having some of these health issues, like I don't know. Did you, looking back on that, can you say, wow, in a sense, that's like a picture of God, like God allowing me to experience what I'm doing to myself in order to, and it didn't, it wasn't like that moment that sent you to rehab, but it becomes part of the story and part of what you're seeing. Like, do you see that as a picture of God's grace a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. Because the drinking, although it had increased, the length of time and the amount that I was drinking, although substantial, wasn't enough to warrant the physical reactions that those are the kind of people you see who have been doing decades of this, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was a mercy and a grace of God to do that, because I wholeheartedly believe that the physical symptoms that I started to feel are a direct result or correlated or connected to really the spiritual side of me that was dying, that was away from God, that was, there was the lying, there's the stealing, there's the hiding, there's the deception, man, all of that. It was like, I've told my wife this, I was like, it's like every time I would have those little heart attacks or those moments where I was going to the ER, that was like God's finger just jabbing me and saying, enough, there's enough. You can't do this. You can't do this anymore. And so, absolutely. It's a grace of God that he did that. And like you said, it wasn't in that moment, it wasn't enough to get me to rehab, but it was very quickly following that, that I did. And,
so pick up the story there. I mean, you start having these episodes and then where does it go?
Yeah. So I'm having those episodes. I'm having, a massive behavioral changes. Obviously, we know a lot of the neuroscience behind drinking. Prefrontal cortex was completely offline. There was no executive functioning in any real meaning of the word. And
explain that a little bit as someone who's gone through heaven. Maybe, I think we're going to, this podcast will have scientific, aspect of it, but I actually get so fascinated with that. Right. So explain that a little bit, what you learned about the prefrontal cortex and the neuroscience.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, the prefrontal cortex, is right in the front, and it's going to be responsible for your decision making, your impulse control, your ability to think long term. So think consequences. That's why an alcoholic will get behind the wheel of a car and drive. They physically can't think long enough down the road to think, if I get in an accident and hurt somebody, what's going to happen? And so that's why, like for me, it was showing up in, obviously drinking. I would drink before work. I would drink during work. I would, all these things, and not, it wouldn't even cross my mind that if I got caught, I would be in trouble. I would have some sort of consequence or ramification. Uh, those kinds of things is what I'm talking about. And I also think that the neuroscience behind what happens when an alcoholic drinks, um, through the recovery process, I've wholeheartedly come to believe that when you read in scripture of, taking every thought captive, renewing your mind in the spirit, those are neuroscientific prescriptions from God that is meant to help people understand that God has created us whole. We are image bearers of Him, and that includes our brain. It includes how the brain is wired. It includes how the brain functions, and um, and so I think that what neuroscience is showing us when it comes to how the brain operates um, with alcohol, and then also on the other side, the neuroplasticity of it, where your brain can actually change, and you can start thinking and creating different habits, and you can start literally thinking differently. That's, I think, what God is, it probably not the full extent of it, but to some degree, God's talking about that with renewing your mind. Constantly think on these things, whatever's good, whatever's pure, think on those things. That is rewiring your brain. And and so yeah, so that was, that was getting shut down for me. I wasn't thinking of consequences. I wasn't thinking. All I was thinking of is I need to get this substance in my body because it felt like that's what I needed to survive and to live. I had the classic shakes. Every morning I would wake up and reach for the glass of water with the shakes in my hand and try my best to, white knuckle that, so it wouldn't show up.
How much are you drinking at this point? Like, is it just like, hey, I'm going through a bottle of Jack a day? Is it? And I say that, and I just want to encourage people. Like, when I ask that question, we can play the comparison game. So I don't ask that question to be like, when you hear that, hey, well, I'm not drinking as much as Brenton was. That's not the point of this. But what I've learned is that, like, there's one woman we're going to talk to that it was only 2 glasses of wine. Right. And she was an alcoholic. Right. Yeah. And so part of it, though, is to understand that there is such a diverse amount that can be qualified or that people can drink and they can still be alcoholics. Right. So I just want to give that disclaimer. But I am curious, like, how much were you drinking a night or day?
I would say on average, there were certainly days where I didn't go with any. If I was off work, on the weekend or something and couldn't get away, I would just not drink.
Which I think that's a good point too, right? Like, here you are having the shakes, right? And part of chapter 2 in my book is like redefining what alcoholism is, right? It's not about quantity, and it's not about like, I can't go a day, I can go a day without it, so I don't have a problem. You had the shakes, but you could go a day without drinking.
Yeah.
Like, that's fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I was in the treatment center, they did like this preliminary test, within my first day or two there. And they're asking you questions on how much you drink and things like that. And they basically, they were like, there's 2 categories. They're like, you're an everyday drinker, or you're a binge drinker, and you'll go, days without drinking, and then you'll just go hard, for 3 or 4 days straight. I didn't fit any of those categories. So to your point, absolutely. It's not about quantity. It's not about quantity at all. If it was about quantity, people would be able to moderate. If it was about quantity, they could figure out a way to moderate and be okay. It's not about the quantity. As far as how much I was drinking, at that point, I was scrounging change and things like that to get anything I could. So I was doing gas station stuff, and I'd do 4 like tall boys first thing in the morning. So 16 ounces each of like 8%, 12% malt liquors, things like that. So I would do 4 of those in the morning, 4 at lunch, and then usually 1 or 2 on the way home. So
Uh-huh.
whatever, what's that? 8, 10. So about 10 of those a day, when I would drink. And then if I could get it, more when I got home. But by that point, we were not having alcohol in the house. I mean, my wife was she knew something was going on. And we would never have anything in the house. And I think that was her way of, trying to figure out what was happening.
Okay, so you're having, 4, 8, 10, at least 10 tall boys, right?
Yep.
And so again, and I bring this up because I think it's important, is I was never a morning drinker. I would never drink in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And I told myself, well, because I'm not drinking 8 tall boys, or I don't have to wake up and drink, I'm okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, I'm having 6, 7 bourbons at night, plus maybe some high ABV beers,
Yeah.
But that comparison game is, well, but I'm not doing what Brenton did, so I'm good, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's that's part of why I asked that question, is because I think it's important for people to hear, like, yeah, I'm not I never had the shakes,
Right.
Now, when I stopped, I had the night sweats, and I was like, holy crap, I'm waking up in the middle of the night just drenched, And I'm like, oh, wait, I thought I didn't think I had any withdrawal symptoms. Oh, no, But I think that's why I think it's so fascinating and good for people to hear, is like, it looks different, even on different people. And I love what you said about that, even in treatment. Like, even the treatment center is like, no, you either fit into these 2 categories, and you didn't,
Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And it was, I think the big thing, again, to go back to your point of just it's not about the quantity, is, what it was doing to me. Obviously physically and medically was affecting me. But it really was the on the spiritual side and the behavioral side, stealing from my family, my own family, to get, what I needed or what I thought I needed. Those were the kinds of things that's where, just untold amounts of shame and guilt just pile in at that point. I could always justify stopping and buying a drink. I had no justification for lying and hiding it. And I would have to physically just force myself to just not even think and just do, to get the money and go. And then once that's in my hand, then I'm not thinking about it anyway.
Right.
So
fast forward then, bring us to, okay, so that's how much you're drinking. How does it come to a head, and how do you get into rehab?
Yeah. So I'm, basically I had gone out, early one morning to, ironic. I think I was sermon prepping, because when we moved back to our hometown, we got plugged back into our original church. And this is another kind of element to that. I actually, moving back, got asked to be an elder at the church, there. And so I actually did accept that position. So at the time I was serving as a pastor as well. Not the primary preaching pastor, but I was, a lay elder at the church, and I had multiple opportunities to preach. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I think I'd gone out early in the morning to a coffee shop and was sermon prepping, and didn't go to a coffee shop. Well, I went to a coffee shop, but I stopped on the way. And I came back home and was about to leave to go pick up my daughter, who lives in the same town, and we were going to spend the weekend together. And
So you been drinking all day?
That morning I had. So this is from like 6, probably 6 a.m. to like 9 a.m. Is the time difference there. And so like 9 a.m. I get back to the house, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go pick up, my daughter. And I start rifling through my wife's purse to try to find cash, because I was going to pick something up on the way out to meet up. And and she comes around the corner and sees me. And she, rightly asks, "What are you doing?" And I made up some excuse. I tried to cover it with something ridiculous. And she didn't say a word, and she just looked at me and walked away. And that was the moment. I got in the car, and I couldn't get the pain in her eyes out of my head. And as I was driving to get my daughter, I texted her and said, "I think I'm an alcoholic. I need help." And that was it. And I had a friend at the time who had just himself gotten out of a treatment center about 6 months prior. And so I called him and told him, I was like, "Hey, I need to get in somewhere because I can't stop this thing." And so he helped me get the contacts I needed. And 2 days later, I checked into the treatment center. And then I was there. I was in the treatment center for 3 weeks, so detox and initial residential, and started seeing counselors there. And then another really miracle of God was, as I was going through the 3 weeks of residential, I learned that there was an intensive outpatient 12-week program that this center offered. But it was like a crazy amount of money. I didn't have the money. And like 2 days before I was supposed to leave the treatment center, the case manager called me into her office and says, "Hey, I just want you to know, I know you want to go to the 12-week program, but you can't do it." She goes, I called our corporate office and put your name in. She goes, "We have a scholarship that will pay for people to go." And she goes, "We think you're a prime candidate for that."
Wow.
And she goes, "I had to fight for you, but you're in." She's like, "So the whole 12-week program is paid for." And
wow.
that just broke me too. Like, I mean, obviously, like the whole 3-week period, I'm just wrestling with so much stuff. But that was just another massive just stamp of God's grace on me, that he's like, you're not done. This 3 weeks isn't enough for you. And so I was able to go to the 12-week program. I did that, made some amazing connections, some amazing community that I built there. And I lived in my home. I worked my job, and then I would go to group meetings and everything every day for 12 weeks. And then they offered me to stay again, cost-free, for another 90 days outpatient if I wanted. And I said yes. So I did meetings every week with them for another 90 days. And then they were like, "Well, as an alumni, you can just keep coming." So I kept going back to their classes for about a year. And and then eventually they started talking to me like, we need seat space for other folks. And we think you're good. And so you might want to come by once a month or something.
They kicked you out of the nest. They're like, "You need to fly, brother."
They're like, "Come on." But so I did that whole the whole treatment center thing for about a year. And then and then following that, I've done I go to AA meetings, did the 12 steps with sponsors, and I am a firm believer that there's multiple ways to recover. There's a whole host of different ways to do it. This was just, my way was like, I will take hold of absolutely everything and anything I possibly can to get better. And so I did all the meetings and all that stuff, did the step work with a sponsor, and still have that. And so so here we are.
Man, thank you for sharing all of that with us. I know that was tough. I know there was, especially the emotional part. I can tell you that I can empathize with the look on your wife's face, right? It was the look that I got when I had my rock bottom moment, which, by the way, you don't need to have a rock bottom moment to realize you have, a misordered and disordered relationship with alcohol. I think that's a misnomer. And
Right.
I know you're
Yeah.
not saying that, but I think, again, it's one of those lies that keep us, enslaved, I think, for longer, that the devil uses, is that, well, you haven't hit your rock bottom yet, so you're good. No, I mean,
Right.
I hope you don't. I hope you, if you're listening to this, I hope you don't have a rock bottom moment, please, because as Brenton can attest to, and as I can attest to, the look on your spouse's face when she realizes that you are lying to her and how easy it is.
Mm.
Oh my gosh. Right? Like,
Yeah.
So I get drunk. Yeah. She asked me the next day. I lie like Peter 3 times. And then when I finally admit it to her, the look on her face, right? And I think, you know that look, right? And I don't pray that on anyone. So thank you for being vulnerable, right? I talk about radical vulnerability and the power that it has. And so I appreciate that. I want to ask a few follow-up questions that I've gotten that I think are helpful. So I know how, in a sense, I was able to justify my drinking. And some of it is, I talk about that this is a disease, right? And it's a disease on both the physical level and the spiritual level, right? It's both. Mm-hmm. And so with the prefrontal cortex, there are things that shut down and you're not thinking straight. And I get that. And so, but I'm wondering, how are you as a Christian elder in your church? What are some of the things you're telling yourself in order to either justify or ignore or cover up the cognitive dissonance? Like, what are you telling yourself that's helping you continue in this pattern at the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know on a functional kind of practical level, if I knew that I was engaging in anything ministry related, I would tell myself I'm only going to drink in the morning. But I would drink a lot in the morning. Certainly my wife picked up on it when I would show up, and not be exactly myself. But I think I just always told myself that I could hide it. I would just smooth enough that nobody would pick up on it, is what I, kind of told myself. And mm-hmm. I think subconsciously there was this element of, maybe I deserve this a little bit. Like, I deserve to feel good because I haven't felt good for a long time in ministry. There certainly was this feeling of, there was a lot. So, there's obviously a lot to this that we could talk about, but there was a lot of, how I wanted to show up to people. And I felt like alcohol was giving me that. I was able to be more confident, more outgoing, more at ease. I quickly realized that it, lowers your inhibitions and you can speak a lot freer. I tend to be a little bit more on the introverted side. And so that led to, if I was around people or doing anything ministry related, I felt like, oh, well, if I have a drink now, I can actually connect with them better, because I'll be looser and relaxed and not so much in my head about how I'm showing up and how I'm appearing. Because there was a lot of baggage that I had to unpack, surrounding identity and surrounding how I appear to people and how I want to come across. And so obviously before doing all of that work, I thought this is kind of needed for me to be able to show up in a way that is actually helpful to people. And I think those are some of the ways that I was able to kind of justify it. And then there's just the outright denial and not thinking about it, consciously. Just, I'm not even gonna think about this, and I'm just gonna do it, and then I'm gonna show up. So
the other question I want to ask is how did your wife, how has she described what this time was like for her, and what has your relationship become now that you've gotten sober?
I would say the 2 years you know, really heavy and severe drinking. I mean, I think she would just say absolutely gut wrenching. I mean, absolutely. She's told me, you became somebody completely different. Um,
Yep.
and not just when you're drunk, just all the time.
Yes.
Neurologically, again, your brain rewires and you think differently. You're not present. You're constantly thinking about the next drink. You're thinking about when can you get to the nighttime, the nightcap. You're thinking about those kinds of things. You're not present. I think just absolutely gut wrenching. And she's told me there were times where she was like, this can't go on. I can't do this. Like I can't be in this if this is who he is becoming. Um, and and that was all the way up into treatment, for those 2 years, especially right at the end of the lives, like the last 6 months, was very much that. And then there's me who just thinks everything's kind of fine, um,
Yeah.
because you're not thinking, and not picking up on anything, and so I think that's how kind of she would probably describe it. And since that point, I mean, it's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of vulnerable honesty on my part, and a lot of accountability, and a lot of trying to reestablish and build the trust that I broke. And so it's been a process. I mean, I think right now, I think we're doing as good as we possibly could be. She's incredibly gracious, incredibly kind and loving. Um, she's doing her own work to process through what I put her through, over the last couple of years. And so she's in the process of healing with all of
Yep.
that as well. And we actually kind of, ever since being in recovery, I've been seeing, I see a trauma informed, therapist, and then we've worked through all those kinds of things. And I kind of got to a point where we both kind of agreed, okay, I'm in a very healthy place now. And so we're like, we want, her to get there as well. And so she's in that process right now. But I think that overall, yeah, I think we're about as good as we possibly could be. I mean, I love the fact that there's times we'll just be driving down the road and she'll just randomly look at me and say, I love sober Brenton. And that feels good. Like, man, that feels good.
Yes.
And just, I mean, yeah, and just being a dad, like, I mean, probably they're just like, it's unreal, the being present and loving and like
Brother.
having your full faculties every moment of every day, being able to love the people that God has given you.
Yes.
It's such a beautiful thing. And even, I mean, it's so crazy because like even before everything was, I was drinking like crazy. I don't know if it's just the experience of life or what, but there's such an incredible gratitude that comes now every day of being with them, that they've chosen to still be with me, is such a beautiful picture of God's
Yes.
grace. When I was in rehab, the number one book outside of the Bible that I read, and I think I read it probably 4 times through, that absolutely rocked me, was Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland.
Yes.
And I think it gripped me so heavily because there was so much of an identity thing, and there was so much of a misconception of who God is, I think, that I had been walking in. That, they talk about kind of first stage spirituality and second stage spirituality, where the first stage you have all of the mental knowledge of who God is and who you are and all of that. And that certainly was where I was. But I think there were depths of the second stage where it's the experiential aspect of who God is and his love and his mercy and his justice and his holiness. There's experiential aspects to that on a spectrum. And I think what recovery did, and those moments in rehab, and what, like, the Gentle and Lowly book I will promote for the rest of my life, what that did is open the door for me into really, as the book talks about, Jesus's heart for the sinner, for the downcast, for the messed up person,
Yeah.
including the messed up pastor, to step in and experience the love of God in a fresh way. And that, yeah, so that was absolutely life changing. And that, I think, I pray just continues to kind of pour out of who I am now onto others. So,
It's
yeah,
funny you say that, because I think one of the biggest noticeable differences that that I've noticed in my life is the amount of grace I'm willing to give others. Doesn't mean I'm perfect, right? There are still people that piss me off, right? There are
yeah,
still people that just get on my nerves, and yet, but I have this phrase tattooed on my arm now: "He today, I tomorrow," and it's the saying of the Desert Fathers. And
mm,
the story goes that there was one monk comes to the other monk and is like, "Can you believe what so and so did?" This is all my paraphrase, but "Can you believe what so and so did?" And the monk looks at him and goes, "He today, I tomorrow." Like, what is, like, we are just one decision away. And so the amount of grace that I'm willing to give others has been, I've loved that about myself. And what you're talking
yeah,
about, being present, Brenton, like, so yes. I
yeah,
it's like we're recording this podcast and my son has a last minute baseball practice. And it's like 2 years ago, I would have been buzzed by now and I wouldn't have
mm,
gone. My wife would have gone, and I would have been like, I'd made up some excuse or whatever so that I could stay home because I was already buzzed, and then just drink more. Right.
yeah,
And it's like the moments that I'm able to be present for now is just, I wouldn't trade that for the world. Two more
yeah,
questions.
yeah,
One, you know, I'm a big proponent of getting to the root of why we're drinking, right? You talked
mhm,
about escapism. I think we both agree on that. You talked about going to a trauma-informed therapist. I'm not asking you to go through all your trauma, but you had talked a little bit earlier on about maybe some of the aspects of failure that you were struggling. I'm just curious what you
yeah,
found when you went digging about what was at the core of your drinking.
mhm. Yeah. So I think this the simplest way that I've come, at least up to this point, to be able to describe it um, is really been my identity. It's been an identity issue, and with identity issues, you're if you're looking to anyone other than God for your identity, right? You've got an idol, and so
Yes.
it's this identity idolatry thing. And so what I've worked through is noticing, even as a young child, and then certainly into a young adulthood, um, always having my identity in my performance, what I did, whether that was ministry, whether that was wealth, whether that was my current job. Um, there was always some sort of external factor, right, that was creating for me my identity narrative, and that's how I would kind of live out. And so there was times where that would work well for me. There's times where most times it didn't work well for me because I wouldn't live up to the identity, expectation that I thought that I put on myself, or that I thought other people had. And so in all of the work that I've done, it's been a lot about becoming okay with who I am. Now told someone the other day that I was talking to, actually, on Instagram, and they asked if I was a believer, and I said yes. I said yes. I said I'm a former pastor and still a Christian, um, and I um, everything that I'm learning from my therapy sessions and things like that. There's such this beautiful integration with God's word and what the spiritual side of things, and just how God has created me. And um, and so when I walked through that season of going to the church, becoming the lead pastor, there was a swelling of identity in ministry, and there was kind of this feeling of like, finally I'm where I'm supposed to be. Um, but not so much because I think that's where God, certainly God wanted me there because I was there, but not so much of like this is where God has me, but more of like what I'm doing for God. Like, I'm grinding, I'm working. This isn't an easy church. This isn't an easy people. Like, and I'm faithfully doing this thing, and this kind of identity wrapped up into that. And so when that got removed, even though it was my own choice to step away, when that got removed, that's where the feelings of failure came in. And that's where the identity, because then it started being like, man, I'm like, you're in your 30s, you know, divorced, you've got a kid with, you know, your ex-wife, you're remarried, you've got kids, like all these like little check boxes that those of us who are raised in Christendom probably don't want to see get checked off.
Yep.
Those were piling up. And there was just another checkbox of pastor to church, didn't pastor a church, you know. And for whatever reason, God chose to use that as the catalyst to crush my identity and my idolatry and looking at everything. And so I, you know, started drinking and found drinking would allow me to not have to deal with that. And then in sobriety, I get the privilege of dealing with it, and it's not easy. But I get the privilege of dealing with that, and I get the beautiful privilege of having God actually shape my identity and kind of mold my soul in this way where there's this beautiful just kind of existing and being and the union with Christ, that it isn't about pastoring or ministry or working a job or finances or any of that, but like this I'm at a place where there's this beautiful, just like quiet, simple life. And if God calls me to something, you know, great. If he calls me to something big, that's great. But for the first time in my life, there's this absolute peace of just day by day, one day at a time, God's got me where he wants me. And on my wall in my home office, taken from the Gentle and Lowly book and ultimately from scripture, I just have framed, I am beloved. And that was what I needed to hear, because everything was so works based for me, of how I was performing, how I was showing up, how I was living, what did I have, what did I do? And there's a whole host of reasons as to why I kind of came to think all that, but that's how I've been living. And now, you know, by the grace of God, I'm just living under that banner of beloved. And there's so much freedom in that, to be able to live that way and engage people from that space of beloved. There's no need to show up any way other than the way that I am. And if you like me, great. If you don't like me, cool. Like,
yeah,
it's incredibly freeing. And it's those things that I always heard growing up, right? Union with Christ, freedom, all that stuff I heard growing up, and now it's actually experientially happening to me. And God used alcohol to break me to get to that point.
Yes.
And now if I can do anything, you know, to help people, not just stop drinking, like that's definitely helpful.
Yes.
Not just stop drinking, but if I can help people realign, and alignment's this, you know, super popular buzzword right now, but if I can help people realign by the Spirit's help with who God has actually made them, and that God loves them, and that God created them, and that the purpose of their life may be completely different than what they're thinking it is. But if they're just taking it one day at a time with God, and if I can help people kind of experience and get to that spot, that's what I want to do. Because it's been life-changing.
So I swear, Brenton and I mean, we talked a little bit before we started recording this, but not a ton. And I did not set him up, but the identity piece is so huge, right? I have a whole chapter on identity in my book, and it's one of the, when I talk about the 4 steps I took to break free, like that is step number 2. And it's finding your identity, right? And I think, you brought me to tears a little bit there, because the growing up in a works-based religion, which, by the way, I grew up in a works-based religion that loathed the word religion, right? They would say, we're not religious. We're not, what are you talking about? And yet they traded the works-based faith of one denomination for the works-based faith of another. And that having to prove myself or strive, right, was a part of some of my story as well. And so when you talk about being beloved, man, yes, so good.
Yeah.
2 final questions. One would just be, I'm curious, and I think our listeners would be too, of, you're a pastor, you're an elder. You told me ahead of time that you had to tell your church about this.
Yep.
How did that go, and how did your church react?
Yeah. So, so I called our lead pastor that same weekend when I, called to get into treatment, and told him everything that was going on. And he was incredibly supportive. I mean, incredibly supportive. And they, as a church, actually came alongside and helped with the treatment center financially. Kind of was just like, well, any way we can help you, we will. And so they actually were monumentally helpful. When I came out of the residential side of treatment, we obviously started having a lot of conversations, myself and the other 2 elders at the time, and we basically agreed, I needed for my own health and my own recovery and my own everything that I was going to have to do in helping to heal myself and my family, to step down. And so, in what may be somewhat of a bit of an unprecedented move, I read, we had a kind of a special, I guess, members meeting where all the members showed up after service. And I read a letter of confession to them, and basically informed them of what I had been doing and what I had done, and didn't get into all the nitty gritty details, but just said, this is what's happened, and these are my steps moving forward. And so I, removed myself from eldership. But one thing that I'm forever grateful that came out of that was in that time of confession, obviously incredibly hard to do, incredibly emotional for me. I mean, these are people I had now served with, for 2 years, and then another, 5-6 years before that. And I told them that I'm stepping down, as one of your pastors, but I'm not going anywhere, because I need this church, and I need the community, and I need God's grace to continue to pour into me through His means of the church. And so, so I still attend that same church 2 years later, and have a great relationship with both the pastors, and have found some really great relationships out of that, that have kind of come out of that, and some that fell off and fell away because of it. But overall, the response was just overwhelming grace, at least in my case. A lot of grace, a lot of understanding, and a lot of, we're walking with you. Now, there hasn't been a lot of, I think there's a lot of unknown within the church world on how to walk with somebody through these things.
Yes.
And that's actually something that I'm hoping to kind of go into long term as future ministry, possibly, is being able to work with churches and ministry leaders on what does it look like to walk and reintegrate somebody who is coming out of substance abuse or really any kind of addiction? How can we create a culture that's safe, a culture that is welcoming for those folks, that still provides accountability, but a culture that's a safe space for people to come forward and say, I have a problem, and God forgives me, and God loves me, and I can still walk in this church, not feeling stigmatized and not feeling ashamed, but welcomed and loved. And I think the church, their initial response was incredibly gracious. I think there's been a lot of, we don't know what to do with you kind of thing, which is understandable.
Yeah.
That's understandable. And that's where my heart for kind of my long-term vision. I'm going back to school now. I wouldn't have done that if I was drinking. I'm getting my MBA, and I'll graduate this spring. And so long-term, I want to do a consulting company called the Day One Group, where we partner with churches and help create those kinds of cultures and ministry training on not only the person in recovery, how to help and love and walk with them, but also their families. Because,
Yes.
whether it's the wife or the husband, certainly the kids, how can we as a body of Christ come around and insulate them, not isolate them, in what is some of the darkest moments of their lives. So yeah, that's how the church, that's how that all played out and how it's kind of been going moving forward. Yeah.
Well, sign me up for helping and supporting that endeavor, because I think it's awesome, right? It's absolutely needed. And I think you're right. Like, I think I'm finding, even as I talk to people, is, the church just doesn't know what to do with people like us. And I'm not saying that that's like out of malice necessarily. I mean, sometimes it is, right? There are some whitewashed churches, right? Whitewashed tombs, right? As it says in the Bible, but they don't know what to do with us. And I think because of that, it leads to inaction. And as we know, what is the one thing that fuels our addiction is isolation. And so even if it's not outward shunning, if you are not actively wrapping your arms around people, asking people like us how we're doing, having programs in place, that isolation, you and I both know isolation all too well. And, hello darkness, my old friend, right? And so I think I love that is your heart. And so keep me informed about how I can do that. Last question is, and it doesn't have to be a long answer. It can be like, you know what? We're just going to go with this, by the way. I think the Lord is this is going to freak some people out, but the Lord has been speaking to me during this podcast about some things. And one of them is, all the marketing people say, your podcast can only be like 30 minutes. And I'm like, the Lord's like, it's going to go as long as it needs to. And if that's 30 minutes for some people, great. If it's an hour and a half for some people, great. And so, but I don't care. So all that to say, I'm going to ask you this final question, which is, what is your advice to people, even maybe who are listening to this, who are like, okay, I'm being convicted here. I want to do something about this. I don't know what to do.
My initial advice would be, if you are graced by God to have a moment of clarity, like I was, as painful and as heartbreaking as it was to see my wife's eyes in that moment, that was my moment of clarity. If you have a moment of clarity, if anything that's been said on this podcast or anything you've read strikes you and you're even questioning your relationship with alcohol, or if you just deep down you really do know you need help, if that moment of clarity strikes, move, act on it, say something. Just say, I literally just texted, I need help, and that started the ball rolling. And I think there are a lot of us, not enough people that you can reach out to that can help provide those pointers. But that's the first thing, is saying something. And I tell you what, the shame that you're feeling, and the shame that holds you kind of in that bondage of, what's everyone going to think? How are they going to treat me? What am I going to be looked at? Am I going to lose everything? I just think, what good is it if you gain everything but you lose your soul? And that fear of what's going to happen if I say something is very real. On the other side of that, equally as real and twice as powerful is the grace of God. And I think that if you say something, people will be put in your life that can help provide further direction. And, for some people, that's going to look like going to a treatment center. For me, I knew I needed that. I just knew myself well enough in that moment of clarity to know I need to get away and get help. For other people, they don't need to go that direction, and they can find a community. And that's kind of the second piece of advice is in that moment of clarity, say something. Secondly, find some sort of a community, even if it's just one other person. Just try to find somebody that you can connect with that's walked this road or is walking this road with you, because you're not alone, and you will feel like you're alone. You'll feel like nobody understands, but you're not. You're not alone. There's nothing new under the sun, and I think that was written for a reason. And find your people that'll help you walk through this, because, even as I'm sitting here, like with you, we just met, and I feel, a connection just from our brotherhood in Christ, and then also just our life experience. And if you can get that, I think that's going to go a long way in helping you take that next step.
I feel the same way. Did we just become best friends, as they would say on Step Brothers?
Yep.
Totally agree. And man, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, like you said, that moment of clarity, I think, is important. I remember when I had my moment on the beach in Miami, and confessed it to my wife the next day after lying. There was so much hurt and shame. There was shame and all that stuff, but there was clarity. And to your point, I sent an email while my wife and I were having that conversation on the beach. I sent my first email to my trauma therapist and said, I think I'm an alcoholic. I need to get to the root of this. When can I come in? And literally sent it, put it up to my wife's face and said, I'm taking the steps right now.
Yeah.
And so I think it's same but different with your story, right? It's like, I need help. Okay. Just do it. Right. So, man, Brenton, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I think we're going to be talking with you more. I'd love, especially as you develop the organization you're talking about, the Day One organization. I think it's so needed, and I want to support that personally. And I think there's a lot of people who may be listening to this who would like to support that. So thank you so much. Again, if people want to get in touch with you, they can go to at Office Recovery. You're very responsive on Instagram. So go check him out. And Brenton, thanks again for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. I appreciate it, man. This has been a blast.
Oh, powerful, right? I mean, I love Brenton. I love his story. I love his openness. If you're like me, you cried during parts of that, because I think there's such a genuineness about where he's been and now where he is. And so I hope that was encouraging to you. I talk about that I want the podcast to have stories of people just like me and you, so that you can see yourself in these stories. But every time I do one of these interviews, I see myself and I see parts of myself, and it is a reminder of how grateful I am for the grace of God and to have returned and given my life fully over to Jesus as a result of seeing the depths of my sin. And so I hope that is true for you too. If you have a Christian alcoholic story, whether that's with an addiction story, then whether that's with alcohol or whatever, go to christianalcoholic.com, and let me know. And maybe you could be on the podcast as well. When you're there, you can also pre-order the book, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. I would love to have you as part of the community that helps launch this book. And, I'm just like Brenton. I'm going to be radically vulnerable about what I've gone through, and I think it will help you as well. So thank you. We will see you next week on the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast.